Today we are delighted to announce that this podcast will be supported for the rest of the Premier League season by The Athletic. The Athletic is home to the best coverage of your club, written by a world-class team of writers. Get reading now by visiting theathletic.co.uk/Tifo and get 50% off if you sign up before the end of August. The Athletic, the new home of football writing. Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. My name is Joe Devine and today I'm joined by Seb Stafford-Bloor. Hello Seb.
Hello Joe.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. We're going to talk about VAR today, aren't we?
We are.
But later on, towards the end of the podcast, we also had a chat with Ed Malyon, who is the new head guy, I guess, at The Athletic. It was a very enlightening chat, and as you will have heard at the beginning of this episode, The Athletic is supporting this podcast for the rest of the season, which we are delighted about. Hopefully we're going to hear from more of their writers throughout the course of the season too, and as I said, the last sort of 15-20 minutes of this podcast today is a chat with Ed about what The Athletic is, what they're offering. It's a bit geeky for us as well because
I think it's very interesting. Like it was kind of because it's been the source of the subject of so much conjecture for so long that to actually almost put a face to it and give it a shape was really interesting because we kind of, I suppose I first heard about it maybe 2 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, and so in the between time it's been you've heard of all the people that are going to be working there, and we haven't been quite sure in sort of what capacity and with what kind of briefs, but now we do. I think it's released on the Tuesday, so it went live yesterday. But I think what I took away from it was that there's a real intent to not just do the same thing. I mean, a lot of the people moving over to The Athletic will be familiar, but they're obviously going to be tasked with a different kind of project and with sort of, again, a bit of a horrible buzz phrase, but maximising their abilities, and that's very interesting. Given the level of talent involved, that should be very interesting.
Well, anyway, we'll be talking about that with Ed later on, so stick around towards the end of the podcast to listen to that. Today's episode in main, though, is about VAR, and it seems like an odd time to be talking about VAR. Why are you talking about it now, Joe? Well, I will explain to you. Because, Seb, you went to Stockley Park.
I sure did. Yeah.
And on the way there, you asked yourself a lot of questions in the third person, i.e., why am I going here? And you answered...
I answered because I'm interested to see what the Premier League's take on VAR is.
So what was the event that you attended?
So it was
it was a special event.
It was
not normal people weren't invited, just special people.
Well,
like
actually, a lot of people were invited. So what the Premier League are doing is they are spending the time between now and the start of the domestic season, educating members of the media, fans, fan groups. Obviously, it goes without saying that they've been holding consultations with clubs, players, managers, coaches, that kind of thing. But they wanted to kind of introduce vision is the wrong word, but their variation on it, because obviously Premier League is adopting VAR at a time when a lot of very negative precedents exist. A lot of sort of I think the way VAR has been used up until now has created the suspicion of it that it's coming to interfere fully with the flow of the game and to disrupt everything and to create some of the, more of the scenes that we saw at, for example, the Women's World Cup and the Copa America, where it really wasn't used particularly well. It became very pedantic, and I think most people would agree that it actually ruined several of the games. I mean, if
I agree.
Well, if you get to the end of a tournament and one of your big talking points is the use of VAR, that's not good. I think it's like the old maxim about what makes a good referee, the referee that you don't notice. I think you could probably apply the same thing to VAR.
It's impossible not to notice VAR.
It is, especially so in the way that it was used.
So today, what I want to get from you is firstly, what is different about how VAR is being implemented into the Premier League? Also, where personally you think the pitfall, not necessarily of that new system, but the pitfalls of it are generally, and we can talk about some more specific instances if we want later on. I suppose the first question, as we said, is we've seen how it has been applied at various international tournaments. We've seen how it's been applied elsewhere. Tell us how it will be applied in the Premier League and specifically where the differences are. Right. And it's as of the season just beginning in August 2019.
Correct. Okay, I think a good starting point is to discuss what the Premier League's philosophy is with it. which is maximum benefit, minimum interference. So previously, referees have been seen to take large chunks of time viewing decisions which should be fairly simple. So a clear case of, I don't know, a trip in the box or an elbow to the face. Decisions which you would see and think, right, well, that's a red card, that's a penalty / no penalty, make the decision and move on. Additionally, there's also been this creeping sense that VAR is being used to re-referee matches. So one of the focuses in the Women's World Cup in France was goalkeepers remaining on their line for penalties. And this became it was ridiculous, the over focus on it, and the kind of, again, the time lost on trying to determine tiny little details, and it became too much. It was allowed to seep into too many areas of the game.
We could also say, specific to those sorts of incidents, that we know that the goalkeeper already has a massive uphill battle, and most of the time it's luck when they make that save. Luck mixed with a bit of knowledge, as if you're going to dive left, these are the areas that you try to cover, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time you would say if a goalkeeper saves a penalty, it probably is a bit of luck and a bit of skill. It's an uphill battle already. Why make it more difficult? I know that's what the rules say, but why waste the time and effort, and particularly the time of the fans and the players during the game, to enforce those sorts of rules?
I agree. That's not the reason why it's been done. I think that sort of there are certain rules which unofficially you kind of give and take, and you can let some of them go.
You need flexibility.
Well, and more importantly, you need flow. What you don't need is a lot of different areas of the game where the match pauses and someone checks a detail which, for all intents and purposes, is actually incidental. I agree. Goalkeepers should not be allowed to stray yards off their line. What I don't believe is if someone has strayed a millimetre off their line, that we should be spending 5 minutes trying to determine whether they have or they haven't. Basically the way the Premier League present this is as a sort of an overarching vision, which is that they don't want the human element of the game lost. Now, there's a couple of key areas where they're trying to achieve this. The first, and probably the most significant, is that there is people will become familiar with the referee review area, RRA, which is the position on the sideline where they have the little monitor. So you've seen that plenty of times. Anyone who's watched football recently, the
little podium.
The little podium. So the procedure has been up till now. Referee is alerted to a potential check or speaks with the VAR. Is then told, right, you have something to check on your screen. Referee goes over to the side of the pitch, gazes at the screen for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, comes back on and makes a decision. Now, the Premier League's version of this will be that if an incident occurs within a referee's, and bear with me on this, a referee's realm of I think it's, what was the phrase they used? It means basically if an incident is expected by the referee, if the referee is being advised on something he thinks he saw but is not quite sure of the detail of, then he can take the VAR's advice without looking at the screen. So, for instance, a tackle happens and the VAR tells the referee this is much more serious than you thought it was, or as appeared, in real time.
And that also counts if the referee has seen what he thinks is a challenge and given a yellow card in maybe what would be a clear red card incident.
That's correct. The referee retains the ability to check something on the screen, but he is now able to just take the VAR's advice. Where that does not apply is if something occurs off the ball. So, say for instance, a corner comes into the box, it's cleared 40, 50 yards up towards the halfway line. The referee and both of his assistants turn their attention to the play. Meanwhile, someone in the box throws an elbow. And it's a violent conduct style offence. The VAR would alert the referee to say this has happened. Because he has had no vantage on the incident, he goes to then check it on the screen and then makes his recommendation that way, or makes his decision that way. In reality, it's probably going to that sounds a little bit more dramatic than it really is, but it is actually a time-saving, continuity-preserving initiative, which I quite like. I don't want to...
But presumably it's just to keep the referee the authority as much as possible.
Well, the referee remains the authority.
The referee has to have seen every incident, which is why if he hasn't seen it and the
or
VAR
his assistants.
alerts him to it, or his assistant.
Referee or assistant.
So if assistants see an off-the-ball incident that the referee didn't see, does the referee still have to go over to the VAR podium?
He retains the ability to go whatever the case, but
Right.
he would presumably consult with his assistants. So if the VAR...
As they would do now.
As they would do now. So if the VAR is advising of something and an assistant says, right, well, we've seen this, then yes, he can take the VAR's version in his earpiece and award a red card or a free kick, or not a free kick, or a penalty or something like that. Very rarely would that affect a penalty decision, though, because you'd expect any time the ball was in the box, at least two pairs of eyes would be on it at the same time. So the VAR would be able to assist. And the referee remains the ultimate authority on the field.
It just seems like a strange system to have. I mean, I understand why they do that, but it's odd, isn't it? It's a bit like having...
You know what?
It's like having the total authority elsewhere via the video technology, with the team of people in the magic caravan outside the stadium who are observing all of this.
We'll talk about that because we actually got to use it during our day at Stockley Park. So we'll
come back to that.
The dynamic of it, yeah.
Who theoretically could execute every single decision more accurately than a referee on the pitch could do.
Mm-hmm.
But then saying, don't worry though, because the referee's still in charge, even though he's the fallible one in this instance, or he or she is the fallible one in this instance, and we have the ability to do it. Why not just get rid of the referee?
Human element. It's exactly the same. Is that in line with the principle? The Premier League do not want to interfere with the human element of the sport.
But they are.
They are, but in a sort of, if we accept,
in a quite confusing way. I mean, I don't want to denigrate your ability to communicate this.
It is confusing,
but it's not straightforward.
It's going to get more confusing as we go on through here.
And also, I find that what is going to be what's more likely, presumably the reason they don't want to interfere with the human element of the sport is so that they don't upset the sport and its fans, right? But more fans are going to be irritated by retrospectively looking at things that they consider to be a red card, but because of the almost, you could call it the bureaucracy between the VAR and the referee and the way the Premier League has decided to delineate it, may or may not actually be the correct decision.
Well, I don't think that dynamic specifically will interfere with the adjudication of decisions. I don't think it will affect whether something is given as a red card or not. The Premier League are also setting what they refer to as a high bar for clear and obvious. So the idea is not to, again, re-referee the sport in every incident. It is to find egregious mistakes and to eliminate them. It is not to spend 5 minutes at a time slowing something down to sort of microsecond, what am I trying to say?
Stoppage time, yeah.
No. They're not trying to find mistakes.
Oh, that the human eye couldn't observe.
For the sake of it. No, they don't want to do that. What they want is a means of assisting the referee without the presence of VAR essentially becoming overbearing within the context of the game itself.
It's just it's hard to accept where the line is in
I
that case.
I understand.
Because if the technology is there to do more with it.
Yeah, but there's a line.
Where is the line?
Well, I have sympathy for people who try and determine where that line is, because either you strive for 100% accuracy and make the game into a very fractured, broken, unpalatable spectacle, non-spectacle, or you accept that there are vagaries within the sport. Refereeing decisions have always been subjective, and actually they remain subjective because there are incidents within a football game that to one VAR will look different than they do to another, or to a different referee, and someone's perception of what a clear and obvious mistake varies too. So you're not creating what would be a sort of a sterile spectacle by VAR. You're not stopping the game to make sure each time that you've got 100% the right decision. That's not the aim at all.
Because it isn't exciting like it is in tennis.
No.
It just isn't. I thought it might be when we were talking about it, years ago, but it's not. At Wimbledon, when we're waiting for the ball to be in or out, that's kind of fun.
Well, also...
It's not with football.
The other sort of false equivalency which is drawn is with rugby union. And people say, well, why don't we have a rugby type situation? I was like, well, that's precisely what football needs to avoid. Rugby union has become unwatchable as a result of referees stopping a game endlessly to watch replays of something on a big screen, standing in the middle of the pitch while everybody who's paid to be in the stadium sits around. No, it's
also
awful.
Rugby union, which as a sport stops naturally frequently anyway, right? Every time possession nearly every time possession is switched, the game stops.
It doesn't, Joe. I mean, the ball goes out of play and there are stoppages for injuries. But it's not really true that the game has natural breakpoints. There are pauses.
Yeah, every time there's a scrum.
Every time the ball goes out, every time.
The point I'm making is that supporters are used to there being less of a different type of flow, a staggered flow.
I agree, but then sort of VAR in rugby, the TMO as it's referred, creates an entirely different kind of pause.
Yeah.
It's a non-action. There's a difference between the ball being in play and the game being essentially dead for a period of time. There's a very big difference between that, and it has a very real effect on the supporter dynamic in the ground. And that football must avoid that at all costs.
Well, okay, so you said that the Premier League are hoping to set a high bar as it relates to what is...
a clear and obvious mistake.
Clear and obvious. So these are incidences where VAR is checking something that either the referee has already seen or has missed, right?
Yeah, it's a...
So let's say in this example, it's a tackle.
Let's say it's a tackle, and let's say a referee has seen a tackle and awarded a yellow card. In fact, we can use a specific example. Most people watching will remember Vincent Kompany's tackle on Mohamed Salah at the Etihad last season.
Which I've just watched so I can describe it to people.
Right.
Vincent Kompany, it is one-footed, one is tucked behind, but the studs are up, his tackling foot is off the floor. Salah manages to avoid it almost completely, and he's yellow-carded, right?
He's yellow-carded. So the referee, I forget who the specific referee was in that game, but the referee... judges the tackle to have been reckless rather than dangerous. Now, if you slow that down, I think most referees would say that was actually a red card tackle. Vincent Kompany should have been sent off. However, what I believe and what we've been advised about VAR in the Premier League is the gap between the decision made on field and the decision made post-review does not, even though it would involve probably the upgrading of the yellow card to a red card, does not constitute a clear and obvious mistake from the referee.
Okay, you have to explain that again, though, because even I don't understand what you're saying.
Okay, so...
the difference between the referee's observation of whether or not it was a yellow or a red is not significant enough. No? Okay, go again.
It doesn't constitute a clear and obvious mistake.
His yellow card.
Because he's given a yellow card and he's adjudged the tackle to have been reckless, not dangerous. The tackle is not so poor on second viewing that the decision not to give him a red card at that time would constitute or would represent a clear and obvious mistake on behalf of the referee. Therefore...
But if he had given him a red card, it's not necessarily the sort of thing that would have been seen by VAR and then I know they can't overturn anyway, but they wouldn't have thought to overturn it.
They can overturn it.
They can overturn a red card?
No, they cannot overturn it unilaterally. They can advise the referee to then go and look at it again if necessary.
So if he'd given a red card... the VAR team may not have overturned that.
No, if he'd given a red card, the VAR certainly wouldn't have overturned it.
But if he'd given a yellow card, they also wouldn't have overturned that.
Because it's not an obvious mistake.
So it's a weird grey area in the middle.
It's a very grey area, but again...
So there's a lot of debate there.
And people are going to get angry about this. Because there are going to be instances like that. And also, let's say that happens again this season. They are two big teams. That is a very, very important game in the context of a Premier League season. Most likely it will be again this year. However, we'll go back to what we said at the beginning. The aim is not to referee by computer. It is we are correcting mistakes. We are not perfecting the refereeing.
Okay, right. So theoretically, this incident that we are using as an example, in this new set of rules...
Not a new set of rules.
They're not new.
Well, no, but it's VAR guidelines. They're not laws of the game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I know that's pedantry, but it's important. It's an important distinction.
In the recently written VAR guidelines for the Premier League.
In the way that the Premier League is encouraging its officials to use VAR, yes.
That challenge that Kompany made would be officially both a yellow and a red card foul. Because both could be true in a different context.
But that's...
How does that make sense?
Well, it doesn't make any less sense than it used to under the old refereeing system, because one referee sees that as a red card, one doesn't. It's very interpretive. The refereeing of football has always been subjective. This is a system not to eliminate. The intention is not to take away the subjective element. It is a way of removing terrible mistakes.
I know it was the same before.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that
it's
now
different. You have the technology and you're not using it precisely.
Well, this is the thing, but now you have the technology to be more clear cut about that, and you're deliberately obfuscating it by saying that a challenge is both a yellow and a red card challenge.
You see, I don't see it as an obfuscation. I see it as a determination not to interfere unless it's absolutely necessary. It makes sense. I mean, it's going to anger people, but then the game has always angered people. It's just going to anger people in a slightly different way now. I understand the issue, but in a sense, and I'm not. I wrote a piece about this for Football 365. I hope it doesn't come across as a puff piece, and I hope what I'm saying now doesn't come across as a kind of a
puff speech.
A puff speech. It's just what's clear is the Premier League is in a difficult position with this because you have an either-or scenario of either you disrupt the game for everything, or you have these, what will be seen as inconsistencies.
Or you don't do it.
Or you don't do it, but then, I mean, you have to stay in line really with the other leagues. It's advantageous now for the Premier League to adopt it. It's used in the Champions League. It's used in the Europa League. It's going to be used in the World Cup and European Championship.
It's going to complicate things for the players if their
players have to get used to working under it. You know,
yeah.
and so if you can't really be an outlier, I don't think. So I've got some sympathy. They've held off for longer than anybody else.
Okay. That's a good example then of what their high bar for something being clear and obvious.
I tell you what, let's have an example of the reverse. Let's have an example of a decision which would be overturned.
Because it's quite hard to get to grips with.
It's very hard.
We're doing our best to explain it to people listening, but it is difficult to explain.
We're probably doing an inadequate job with it, but the reality is that we're talking about it as a concept. Once the Premier League starts again and it starts being used, people will get used to the idea of what clear and obvious means.
Yeah.
My hope is that if there is the consistency will come in the example set with its usage. So let's look at the other side of the coin. Let's look at an incident that would be overturned. I can't remember the date, but it was Southampton beating Tottenham. I think it was about spring. I was actually at this game. And there was an incident in the first half, I think, or maybe the second, when it's one of the two, isn't it? First or second half.
Yeah.
Where Moussa Sissoko headbutted Nathan Redmond.
Yeah.
There was Sissoko came in to try and win the ball. A bit of a rough, clumsy tackle, kind of went through Nathan Redmond, knocked him to the ground. Redmond gets up, pushes Sissoko. Sissoko pushes him back. From the TV footage, you can see the referee approaching with a yellow card already out, ready to give it to Sissoko.
Because of the challenge.
Because of the sequence of events that had happened up until that point.
Pre-afters.
Then Sissoko makes a very obvious motion to headbutt Nathan Redmond, but the referee still gives a yellow card. Now, unofficially, VAR was actually being tested at St Mary's that day. It was offline. It was just a test. It wasn't an influence on the referee. I was not in communication with the referee. But as a part of that test, VAR ruled that that should have been upgraded to a red card for Moussa Sissoko. Now, the clear and obvious aspect of this is that the VAR, because I think the referee is Craig Pawson. Forgive me if I'm wrong. But because he already has the yellow card out prior to the incident happening, the conclusion is that he has missed the gravity of the incident. He may have seen some coming together, but not what would obviously constitute violent conduct.
But that's based on the fact that he's got the card in his hand.
No, it's based on a range of factors, including that.
Right.
That he has made a decision, and that he has made no motion to upgrade his decision on account of what had gone on. So the referee would be advising the earpiece, or probably in that instance invited to go over to the RRA. And would then see the headbutt, and most likely Sissoko would have been sent off. It is a clear and obvious mistake because there is not a referee in the country who, having seen a player headbutt someone, would not send them off. So there is no real ambiguity there. It's not the sense of there is no grade of headbutt in the Premier League. You motion towards another player with your head, it's going to be a red card. That's certainly true if you make contact. So there lies the difference, and I accept it's a subtle difference, but it's an important one. And Also, it is necessary to red card a player for violent conduct, but the interpretation of a tackle is more of a subjective area. So in one instance, the VAR is ruling on what is more obviously a black and white issue. In another, it is declining the opportunity to correct what remains not an obvious mistake.
The Tifo Football Podcast is supported by The Athletic, the best place to read about football online. Whether it's dedicated local reporting about your team or rich storytelling from around the world, you'll find it all in one place. For example, on launch day, one of my favourite pieces was by Michael Cox and Sam Lee. The pair explained why, although they had an inferior goals conceded tally, Manchester City were actually better at defending last season than Liverpool. And this is because Manchester City's XGA was better than Liverpool's. So to quote the piece, Liverpool conceded fewer goals because their goalkeeping performance was superior or because the opposition's shooting was wayward. But in terms of not conceding chances, City were better. So for more insight like this from some of the best in the business, get reading now by visiting theathletic.co.uk and get 50% off if you sign up here before the end of August. The Athletic, the new home of football writing.
Okay. Right, well, we've got a couple of... We asked listeners for questions if they had any about VAR, and we have a few in here as well. So I'm going to read them and ask you them now, if you don't mind, Seb.
Okay.
The first one comes from our old friend Emmanuel Adebayor. Now, I assume that is not the real Emmanuel Adebayor, but if it is, hello.
Love just spell it Spurs.
Yeah. What happens if a penalty offence is not immediately given and the other team goes down the other end to score? Good question, Emmanuel Adebayor. Seb?
On the basis that it should be a penalty, the goal is disallowed and the penalty is given.
That's harsh, isn't it?
It is.
Crikey. Okay. This question is from Kartik Garamella. Tell us about how the third of the 3D function will be used that you showed on your Twitter. Can you explain what that is to anyone who, well, most people who didn't see that? Because if it was on your Twitter, no one saw it.
Okay, maybe I will send you a link to that before we put the podcast out. But people will have seen this by now. When offside decisions are made, instead of the straight line used to adjudicate it, now they sort of plot a 3D line, which is designed to create a more accurate reflection of where players are. In reality, the straight line would be fine if players all stood at exactly the same angle, exactly the same body position. In reality, and a good example of this was the penalty awarded to Harry Kane at Wembley during the first leg of the League Cup semi-final last season, where because VAR was only using that single line along the floor technology, it couldn't adjudicate, or it really just had to guess at where the rest of his body was. So a player is in an offside position if any part of his body with which he could score a goal is beyond the last defender. So this is really a mechanism used to provide greater accuracy. The Premier League does not view offside decisions as clear and obvious mistakes. It is a factual situation. A player is either onside or offside, and I can see you shaking your head.
I just think it's ridiculous. And I wish I could remember the specific example. And it was in the World Cup over the summer. In fact, you know what? It was Ellen Wright's goal for England that was disallowed. Ellen White's goal
against the United States.
Against the United States, the one that was disallowed, and she was between the two United States centre-backs.
Yep.
She's facing forwards, she's leaning forwards, her momentum is taking her forwards. The two centre-backs are facing away from their goal, right? By the time she's a millimetre offside, by the time she gets to the ball and takes her shot, they're still 2 metres behind her. There's no possible way they could have caught up. The point I'm making is that if she was a touch back and officially onside, as it would be considered factually to be the case if it was a factual situation, there would have been no difference in the outcome, right? And it is clear to anyone watching that. I'm a bit upset about it.
I can hear the tone of your voice.
Yeah, it's changed.
You know, we've gone from jokey, this is a bit shit, to I feel quite passionate about this, and this is the hill I'm going to die on.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
It's clear to anyone watching that, particularly the people in the magic van outside, and you're going to tell me more about that later.
Yeah.
Who are watching, that the outcome would not have been different, right? It's nowhere near enough for the argument to be that the other players knew she was offside and therefore they weren't acting, or that the goalkeeper didn't come out because he or she knew it was going to be called offside.
Yep.
It's nonsense. It's nonsense. Like the point is, the new technology reveals that to be a stupid rule. The current way that the rule works, and let's remember the reason that the rule existed in the first place was to stop people goal hanging years ago and being 20 feet offside. That's what the offside rule was for. What difference does it possibly make?
Okay, well, you know what my response to that is going to be.
They're not
your
gonna change the
issue.
rules.
No, it's not that. Your issue was with the laws of the game.
It
Rather
is.
Than, yeah, but this is a separate podcast.
But it's not. It's
where
not.
Joe attacks bad laws. That he
No.
doesn't agree with.
It isn't, because
Okay.
the law of the game. I understand the position of that law
Yeah.
without VAR.
Okay.
But with VAR, it is integral to the conversation. It changes everything.
Well, not really, because that is the premise under which assistant referees / linesmen have been working since the law changed.
Which was when? Not that long ago.
No, but I mean, the law has gone through different variations about
Yeah, it
who is
changes all the time.
interfering. Not all the time. It has subtle tweaks to it.
If it's clear and obvious, right? The
But the
linesman
mentality,
call it
the
offside.
mentality
How
of the law.
hard would it be to change it?
That's not a question for VR, Joe.
I think it is.
It's not, because VAR is there to. It is the difference between a Supreme Court justice and an actual legislator. Legislator makes the laws.
This is just what they've
Judiciary
decided.
rules on the laws.
This is just what they've decided that it's.
If that's your little branch of football government, okay.
I don't know.
Do you remember the GCSE politics with this? Yeah,
I think,
separation of
look,
powers?
we didn't all do GCSE politics. Come on now. Right. I personally, I think that because of the implementation of VAR and because of the access that we have to the technology, it fundamentally changes the question about the rule.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that. I think
And
another.
I'm furious.
Well, you know, a more famous example, other than the Ellen White one, which some people may not have seen, the Champions League quarterfinal when Sergio Aguero was ruled offside before Raheem Sterling scored what would have been a winning goal in that tie. VAR was correct to intervene because he was offside. But whether you deem that to be, after a few years of VAR refereeing the game in this way and creating the kind of situation which you're rallying against, maybe they do change it. Maybe there has to be daylight between the players. Maybe, maybe you have to, I don't know.
But the point I'm making is that if there are officials who are already interpreting subjectively, not necessarily, well, I guess intention is part of it in some cases, but if they're already interpreting things subjectively, then why couldn't they add that to the list?
Yeah.
Because it's a stupid rule and it just gets in the way of what good football should be. That was a goal.
I agree. I think there are other laws that fall into the same category.
Let's change them all. I think change all the rules.
I think that would make an excellent separate podcast.
Do you know what makes a good video? We're going to make a video on this. What would football be like if there was one less player on each team?
That would be interesting. We've also done one. We're also going to do one on what would football be like if there was no football for a year.
Exactly.
That should be quite compelling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry. I got all upset then.
It's okay. I love your passion.
Alex Huddleston, or Huddleston, asks, will the Premier League only be correcting clear and obvious errors? It seems lots of VAR is keen to correct even the tightest errors. That's kind of what the conversation we just had.
No.
Sorry about that,
the Premier League will correct clear and obvious errors. What their definition of clear and obvious means, you won't get just by listening to me or anybody. You'll have to see it in action. They will create examples of what it is, and it's not.
After a year or two, we'll have a better idea.
We'll have a better idea, and people will have a better understanding. That does not mean that that people aren't going to get upset about it. They'll get upset.
I'm already upset.
He's already upset.
Nothing's
Season hasn't
even
started. Season doesn't even start until 13 days away.
Simon Ludin.
Yeah.
Why does the ref not go to the TV himself and watch it every single time? Why does it? I think you've already probably answered this question.
He retains the ability to do that. The Premier League are discouraging referees from doing that because of BJML as well.
Because of the flow.
Because of the flow, because of the time it takes, because we see so many disruptions to games with referees who... Actually, I saw one yesterday. There was a very, very late penalty in Hamburg's game against Darmstadt, I think. Stoppage time. Now, how the referee missed it, I don't know, but there was a sort of a collision in the penalty box, and it was very, very obviously a penalty. Anyone could look that up. The referee still managed to take a good 2 minutes looking at the screens. He must have watched probably 15 replays. Premier League do not want a situation where that happens. Mm-hmm. Because, first of all, it's one problem for the television audience, who also have the benefit of the replays. But for people in the stadium who don't, that is a difficult synapse to bridge. It's an empty period of the game where you're not watching anything other than a man watching a television screen which you yourself cannot see, and they cannot show replays in the stadium.
Sure.
Right.
Okay. Joe Farrell 4 asks, and this again, we may have already touched on this, but Joe Farrell 4 asks, could there be an implementation of a margin of error when it comes to close offsides?
I wouldn't have thought so. What will happen with offside? So one thing we do need to clear up is in other tournaments, what we've seen is linesmen, assistant referees always keeping their flags down, because if you put the flag up, it can't go to VAR.
That's the most annoying thing.
If the referee sees a flag and blows the play dead, what the Premier League have got two initiatives here. First of all, they are making players absolutely aware that their responsibility is to play to the whistle, not to flags. But they don't want their linesmen, assistant referees, sorry, I could never stop calling them linesmen. They want their linesmen to rule on everything but very marginal decisions. So if a player is 5 yards offside, what we've seen in the past is, oh, we'll let it go, and then the referee, the video assistant can that's going. The assistant referee has been trained to flag when there is an obvious one. Play stops, restarts as it normally did with a free kick to the team free kick against the team that called offside. They don't want these long periods of dead play, essentially, where everyone knows it's offside, and if a goal results and if the VAR interferes, we know it's going to be ruled off. They don't want players running for an extra 30 seconds, a minute, anything like that. So we're going to see less of that. It's a subtle change, but it's an important one.
Okay. And the final question is another one from Emmanuel Adebayor.
Okay.
What's the amount of time the ref has before he decides whether or not to use VAR?
Yeah. It's not time, it's phase of the play. And this is going to anger people because there has to be a common sense interpretation. So I've got another example for you. Naby Keita scoring at Southampton last season. It occurred after the move had seemingly begun with Mohamed Salah receiving a possession in an offside position. Now, in that instance, it would be ruled that that the move has been going on for long enough, and Southampton have had enough opportunity to clear the ball whereby that original offside would not be considered part of the original phase of play. Therefore, VAR would not go all the way back to the Salah offside and disallow the goal. It does not, again.
Yeah, but I thought offside was factual. It's on or it's off.
It is.
So how does that apply in this situation? It doesn't.
It applies because it's not relevant to the phase of the play. That is the ruling. If it happens, there is no...
That was my criticism of offside when it comes to goal scoring.
But this is your irritation with the offside law, again.
It's not.
VAR's role, according to the Premier League, is not to re-referee endlessly back. It is not to go all the way back to the last time the ball was in play.
So it disproportionately affects play that's led up immediately to a goal?
I suppose you could make that argument.
Or any stoppage in play?
Yeah, you could probably make that argument, yes.
So then if you were to cheat the game 45 seconds before...
there's no time period. It's not time period. It's a subjective judgment. If it was a slow building phase of play...
It's going to include a time period, though.
It is going to include one, but it's not going to be judged by that. You're not going to say, right, we can go back 30 seconds and no more. It's not that. It is a subjective judgment on what is pertinent to the phase of the play. Now, in that instance, it includes several botched clearances from Southampton. It includes multiple... The ball actually, by memory, the ball actually comes out of the box several times before it finally goes back in and Keita scores.
And we should make the point anyway that these are things that would have been missed by the referee anyway.
Yeah, so, which were missed by the referee anyway.
That's what I mean. So these are only instances where the referee's already missed it.
A mistake has been made,
but
the judgment in that instance, again, along the lines of this, we do not want to interfere in everything. We do not want to sterilise the game with technological intrusion at every point, is that the phase of the play, the actual goal, the scoring of the goal, whether you agree with this or not, this is what's the operating procedure. The scoring of the goal has not been affected by that original offside.
Yeah.
The scoring of the goal in that instant has been affected by Southampton's inability to clear the ball properly.
Okay.
Which is actually, I've looked back at that phase of play last week, and I can see both sides of that. Southampton would say, well, he's offside, and I understand that. But then the argument that VAR would use would be, yeah, but it's your bad defending that's cost you the goal in the end. And that is also very fair because it it's appalling. That again, this is going to have to be one of those things where a series of precedents are set, people accept it. It's not going to stop fans going back 3.5 minutes and saying, yeah, but I think that's a trip, so that goal shouldn't count. Of course, that's football. That's going to happen. It's not going to change the game. It's going to make people angry at different stuff. And it's going to lead to amateur football accounts doing exactly that. They're going to get hold of footage. They're going to go back and back and back and back until they can finally find something which, in their sort of one-eyed opinion, affects the game, affects the phase of play. But this is a halfway house which is designed not to get everything right, but to limit the interference.
Can I tell you what I think it's going to lead to, though?
Go for it.
I think it's the only real noticeable difference that most people who watch football casually will notice is that there will be a whole new sort of lexicon of terminologies that they'll have to use on Match of the Day now to talk about exactly the same thing they talked about last year.
Probably.
And it'll just be things like clear and obvious and realm of referee space and just a bunch of new words to describe the same old problems.
So one of the Premier League and PGML, they will the Premier League will communicate with their rights holders. Where there is a live game, there will be a line of communication available. Wasn't specified what that would deal with, but if there was some kind of issue which needed clarification.
So the BBC have got a line to the bunker.
I wouldn't. No. It's not. They can't pick up a phone and talk to the VAR official. It's just the VAR facility in the Premier League will communicate with their rights holders, whether that be the BBC, Sky, BT Sport, for televised games. If something happens and on air, the commentators will be able to say, well, this is why that's happened. But also for something like Match of the Day, that would obviously apply too. There's an important bit that we should add here. So previously, where a decision has been overruled, the mechanism to inform the people in the crowd has been to put a graphic on the big screen. So VAR review, possible penalty, possible red card, and then the actual ruling would appear in text on that screen. As of next season in the Premier League, they will, where it's possible, show an image, still image. Let's say it's a really bad tackle. And this will only apply to overrules of on-field decisions. Won't apply to things which are being confirmed or instances where the VAR is not getting involved. So bad tackle, they will show an image of the incident which best illustrates why the decision has been made.
A still image.
So it might be a boot making contact with the knee of a forward, for instance. Or if it's a handball in the penalty box.
Why is it a still image?
You're not allowed to show replays in.
Yeah.
You're allowed to show goals, I think, and you can show highlights at
for
half
rights
time.
reasons.
Yes, I think so. It's an IFAB rule.
Right. Okay.
I'm not sure why it exists, but it does.
It's a weird one. Okay, so I suppose before we finish, you had your adventure at Stockley Park. You went down and they let you try it out for yourself, right? Will you tell us a little bit about your experience while you were there?
Yeah, no, they let us have a go. So,
is us other journalists who were invited down?
There were other journalists. There were some people. There were some representatives from supporter groups too.
Okay.
They're doing it in little batches. So we went it as a group of 10, and I understand that sort of they're repeating that exercise for a couple of days in the time before the season begins. So the VAR room, it looks a little bit like, I suppose, actually there's a picture of it on my Instagram if you want to have a look at that.
Sorry, they're doing it from a centralised position?
From a centralised
position.
position.
So it's not at the stadium?
No, it's remote. It's all from Stockley Park. You go in there and there is, obviously, I think the most amount of games that happen simultaneously is 5, and that'll be a Saturday 3 p.m. So every desk is its own VAR station, room for 3 different people. The only variation between the desks is that some of them have more computer screens, more sort of monitors, and that's because the televised games have more cameras and present more angles. So each desk with its screens has room for 3 people, a VAR in the middle, who is the appointed referee. By the way, just for the sake of heading off any conspiracies, when these people go into this room, it is for all intents and purposes, sealed off. So there's no phones, there's no devices, there's no...
And who are these people? Are they accredited referees who might otherwise be refereeing a game in the Premier League? Or are they the different...
No, they're referees. So what you have is, in the middle, this is the VAR.
Yeah.
So that would be a referee that anybody would recognise from the Premier League match list.
Right.
They're appointed in the same way as an on-field referee.
Does that mean that they have to hire more referees for the Premier League this year?
They are promoting some from the Championship.
Nearly twice as many?
No, they're supplementing theirs because there are only 5 games that happen simultaneously.
Right.
They don't need to promote that many, but I think there's 4 or 5 that are moving into VAR due to next season.
I tell you what, as a schedule to work out everyone's working week, that is a nightmare for someone.
Big old pain. That's a huge spreadsheet.
Particularly if you've got to think, okay, well, Craig has to be at Stockley Park for the 3 p.m. game, but for the Sunday game, he's got to be all the way up in Sunderland.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
So VAR sits in the middle. On his left sits an assistant VAR, an AVR. New terminology now.
Okay.
Now, so the dynamic on their right is an employee from Hawkeye.
Right. Who make the goal line technology, or did, and presumably are
they
providing the technology.
They do GLT. They also do the line adjudication in tennis.
What is this costing?
I don't know. We're not going to know that.
No.
So the dynamic is footage is playing in front of all these people. When an incident happens, there is a green button and a red button sitting on the desk. Again, I've got pictures of this on my Instagram. And if you press the green button, that creates a bookmark in the footage. So it's something you want to see. The red button is pressed, and that gives communication with the referee on the field.
And the stadium blows up.
The stadium, maybe.
Okay.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Now, the procedure is, if the VAR wants to check something that's happened, the Hawkeye technician alongside him provides him with the replays and the angles and everything he needs to make that decision. While he's viewing those replays, the AVR becomes responsible for the live feed. So on his monitor, there are no replays, there are no anything. He becomes solely responsible for what's going on. So there is never a gap in the footage being watched.
Right.
It's actually quite impressive. I was at a desk with a friend of the show, Nick Miller, and we were shown clips from games last season where there was an incident hidden inside them. Sometimes a penalty or a handball or something like that. And it's very interesting. So Nick was the VAR.
Oh, you were the AVR?
I was the AVR. So Nick would see something. He would press his button and alert his Hawkeye guy.
And you would have to keep watching in case he missed
I keep
it.
watching the live feed in case there is another incident in it.
Uh-huh.
A little bit false because I remembered I actually covered one of the games that we were doing. So I felt like I was cheating.
How did you perform?
I felt Nick gave a very soft penalty, in my opinion.
Right.
In the Man United Chelsea game, we correctly decided that Moussa Sissoko's headbutt was a red card between us. It's very interesting, though.
That is interesting. I mean, because you've just said that a dynamic of just 2 people, and you disagree with each other about whether a penalty is a penalty.
Yeah, but ultimately, in that situation, my opinion is less important. I'm an AVR, I'm an advisor. Nick is the one that sort of communicates to the referee.
But I'm not saying whose opinion is more important.
Yeah,
I'm
and
just
ultimately
saying
the on-field referee's opinion is more important.
But will that not reflect how fans view this? If 2 people in the room who are officiating over it can see something different, then fans are going to see different things.
It does and it doesn't. I mean, like in an instance, in the Sissoko example, I'm a Spurs fan, and I was just like, no, he's just being physical. He's fine. That's just him. That's how he plays. Yeah. But in reality, Nick did say that is a headbutt and a red card straight away.
Uh-huh. We talked about this a moment ago outside, but can you just briefly, before we go on to move on to the next part of the podcast, can you tell me what the point of VAR is? Because the way that I see it, the only reason that I can understand to bring this into the game would be to make it more fair. And I think football is either fair or it isn't.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about all these various different margins and clear and obvious, and in some cases an incident might be both a yellow and a red card and all the rest of it, it doesn't make it any more fair. Therefore, it is no more fair. It's either fair or it isn't. So what's the point?
To eliminate obvious mistakes. There's no fair about it. It's not. Football isn't fair. The whole game that we play isn't fair. The idea of a Premier League being won by a team who have a limitless budget. It's not fair. If we go too far down that path, why are we playing at all? Because you kind of know what's going to happen every single season, really. I mean, within, pretty much that. I know now, and it's the end of July. I know we're releasing this on the 6th of August, but
we've got to turn the aircon off. Oh, we'll be fine. Sorry, we've got the aircon on, guys, but hopefully you won't hear it.
Fair is not part of football anymore. It's like it's willful denial on all of our parts. If you're a Bournemouth fan, you're not going to win the league. Your best case finish is probably 8th. Why are you bothering? Like it's that. It's kind of, it doesn't serve anyone to dwell on that. VAR's purpose is not to make the game more fair. It is to eliminate the obvious mistakes within it. The actual football match, not the sport. The inequalities within the sport are a different podcast.
Rife. Okay, right. Well, that's good. Thanks for relaying your experience to us. As you said, I think the most important thing that you said in this episode, because it is difficult to explain, is that fans, I expect, supporters will watch the Premier League this season. They will watch it the season afterwards, and then they will have a good grasp of how this works. Before then, it's very difficult to really
Until
explain.
then, people will like it when VAR gives them decisions that benefit their team and hate it when they don't.
Yep.
You just got to, in terms of setting its examples and its precedents, that's just going to happen in time. You're not going to get an idea of it just from, I spent nearly 3 hours at Stockley Park, and there are still issues in my mind which are a little bit unclear, despite, a day with the Premier League and PGML. So it's hard, but it's just I believe what they've come up with is a best possible scenario on the basis that it's coming, it's going to be involved in football, and whether I like it by principle or not is really irrelevant. They've come up with what seems to be a model which is less intrusive than others we've seen in the past.
Okay, we'll stick around because in a moment we'll be talking to Ed Malyon from The Athletic about what The Athletic is, and we're all quite excited about it, so thanks.
Hello, yes, I'm wearing a different shirt and I have a different haircut. You'll notice that if you're watching. That's because I'm recording this bit at a different time in the future, but for you, it is still the past, so don't worry about it too much. Just before we move on to the next bit of the podcast, I wanted to tell you about a cool little thing that we'll be doing over the next season. I have a friend, Pete, who works at a really cool app called MatchPint. Some of you may have heard of it before. MatchPint, you can download it on iOS and on Android. MatchPint basically tells you if you want to watch a televised game of football in a pub, but you in an area maybe where you don't know good pub football, or good pubs to watch the football in, I should say, or you don't know the area very well at all, you download MatchPint, put in the game you want to watch, and it will tell you which pubs in your immediate area are showing it, and they'll, there's little helpful tips and stuff. MatchPint are also running a really cool thing this year along with Budweiser, and it is called the Budweiser Premier Predictor. And what you do is you predict the score outcomes, I think, of 5 or 6 games every week. If you get one right, you win a free beer, which you can redeem in up to and over 2,000 pubs in the UK and Ireland. And Tifo have a little league that we've set up this year to see if you guys can do better than me. The answer is probably not, because of course I'm the real footballing genius at Tifo. Forget about Alex, forget about Seb, they don't know what they're talking about, but me, I'm a real special expert. To join our league, you download the MatchPint app. As I said, you can do that via iOS or Android. Sign up to the game and you put in the league joining code TIFO1, and that's the number 1, not the word 1. TIFO1. And every week you can see if you can do any better than me, and maybe together we'll win some free beer. So do sign up, because I guess before the season starts, that'd be cool to see how many we can get in the first week. I'm going to be predicting them every week, and I'm going to be trying to win as many free beers as possible. So do come along and join me. That's the MatchPint app and the league code TIFO1.
Thanks for sticking around, and we're delighted to be joined now by Ed Malyon from, well, I guess newly in a way, from The Athletic.
Yes. By the time this comes out, we will have launched. So happy launch to everyone.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I can't believe it went off so smoothly.
Well, fingers crossed. Ed, will you tell us briefly what The Athletic is? I guess assuming that people have no idea.
I'd like to think it's the biggest and best football writing platform in the world now. In terms of, this is an outlet that's going to cover every single Premier League team. We've got a reporter, at least one reporter, in some cases 2, 3, 4, at every single Premier League team. Got a team of around 50-ish football writers and editors. So I do think that is the biggest team of football writers around, certainly the English language professionally. And from day one, I like to think we're going to have the best coverage of a lot of these Premier League clubs. We've got some clubs outside in the Championship, Leeds with Phil Hay. We've got Derby, we've got Forest, got West Brom, a few more that I've no doubt forgotten. We've got Celtic and Rangers. And then obviously there's going to be a load of other interesting like storytelling around that. We've got Rafa Honigstein, who is the authority on the Bundesliga, but also well connected with German footballers all over the world, and some other people doing Spanish football, Italian, French, everything. So basically, wherever there's a good story, we want to be there anyway. But it's going to be an app and website that I think people will find a destination pretty soon.
Okay. And it's paywalled, right? It's a subscription service.
Yes.
So how do you get over the barrier of making people pay for stuff when it's been free for so long?
Well, I think it's just something that is going to, we always knew this was going to come. Like when I was 22, I got my first job at the Mirror, and I remember being very like young and green. And I asked my first boss there, I said, what advice would you give a young sports journalist looking to make their way? And he said, don't get into this industry because it's dying, which was discouraging. But he didn't mean journalism was dying. Journalism is not dying. He meant newspapers are dying. And it's just a business model thing where I believe that we've been looking for a way to make people pay for journalism for a long time. And I think what you have to do is you have to give the people what they want fundamentally. And if you look at what I call the volume business model, the mass kind of appeal business model, what it comes down to a lot of the time is, so I'm a Palace fan, and what it means is if you want to do an interesting story about Palace, you have to find a way that appeals to this enormous homogenous blob of people that doesn't exist. It's just the general public. So James MacArthur could have a really interesting backstory, and you have to really pitch that to get that out to a national audience. And it's very basic. And every Palace fan that reads that already knows all this sort of stuff because it's their club. Now, imagine if you just had a steady stream of stuff about your club, which is fundamentally what most football fans care about first and foremost. I think there are people, in this room who like reading general football writing. You might like reading about the Belgrade derby or whatever, That's really interesting for a lot of people. But for even more people, the club is the most important thing. So if we can provide the best coverage of every single club and people will just subscribe, they pay £3, £4 a month, and they get all the kind of deep, in-depth coverage of their club. We're going to have to make it good because if they're paying, it has to be the best that's available, right? But there's no way that it's covering Palace in depth or Everton or Watford or Norwich or Southampton. So if we can provide the best coverage of these clubs and people come and subscribe, then we know we can double down on that and make that coverage better and stuff. And so every single club now is going to be covered in a different way. So you can cover it for those fans rather than for the general public, which means you can have interview. Like if I wanted to interview Andy Johnson for The Independent, I can do it, but the general public does not care about Andy Johnson. If you do it aiming at Palace fans, it's a completely different product, right? And obviously we'll expand that out into podcast and video stuff down the line. And there's going to be a load of different things, analysis and opinion and kind of oral histories and deep stuff. But we can just change the way that football coverage is kind of angled right now. And it's an enormous opportunity, I think.
Ed, what are the challenges? I've been subscribing to The Athletic for, I think, about 6 months now. And I enjoy it. But I enjoy American sports, but I also note the difference in not just culture, but regularity. So with your team, it's a baseball team. I think it's right that about 170 games a season. So you have this more continuous flow of activity. With Palace, on the basis that you're in season, you have maybe 2 games. Is it sort of, what are the challenges there to kind of in ensuring that the content is rich enough to sustain the interest of the sort of the loyal fan?
So I think we have an inbuilt advantage in that everyone else is going to keep doing the same stuff, there's no secret here. Like our writers are going to be doing slightly different stuff to what's readily available. Like with the BBC in the UK, like there's always going to be match reports. There's going to be manager quotes and stuff online, and that's fine. Like, people do want to read that, but that means we don't have to do it. Like, what's the point in, if you go to a press conference and everyone publishes the same embargoed quotes, right? What is the point in 8 of the best people who write about that club all having the same quotes?
You know what's always struck me is that anytime I'm reporting from a game and I look around, I see someone like Henry Winter, for instance. You think, if he's here and I'm writing about this, why would anyone be reading what I'm writing? And I think that's a slightly extreme version of it. But if you've got the information covered, and you kind of, given the way that access works in football and just the paucity of it in general, like, if you've got all of that stuff provided anyway, why are people? It's a great unanswered question. Why are people continuing to reproduce it everywhere just so it can be read 2 or 3 times? It's weird.
Let me flip it on its head, right?
Okay.
So imagine if you're like just a normal reporter and say you cover Palace every week, right? So the day before a Palace game, you go to the press conference, you speak to Roy, you send through a little live hit for the website, that goes up straight away. Get a little bit of embargoed stuff off Roy for 10:30 that night. You've got the same as everyone else, fine. Next day, go to the game. Do a on the whistle match report, that goes straight up. Do some quotes after, great, bit of mix zone.
Benign mix zone, yeah.
Next day, got some mix zone quotes. They go live at midday. 3 days work there. What have you written that you're proud of?
Exactly.
And there's a world where instead you can use that time to do stuff that's actually productive. You can do stuff that people are going to want to read. And at the moment that everyone else drops the Papa Soiree mix zone quotes that you had for midday the next day, someone has like a really in-depth feature where they've been talking to a player's family and talking to a player's former coaches, and then you've followed him through that game and you've talked to the coach about him and all this sort of stuff, and it's just what no one else is offering. And that's what we have to do. We have to be offering stuff that no one else is, and it has to be really, really good. And if it's not, then like the whole thing won't work. But I truly believe it will be.
Interesting thing you said there is kind of the what did you write that you were proud of is I've often thought that kind of the best things that come out of weekends are generally stuff that reflects the author's personality. Not too much, because you don't want self-indulgence, I understand. Is that going to be kind of key to what you do? I mean, are we able to talk about the people that you've got?
You can talk about people that we've signed.
Okay, we can. Okay, so we're coming out on the Tuesday. Yeah. So for instance, like, I want to read an Ollie K piece because of Ollie K and his set of abilities and what he represents in the industry. I don't want a list of, it's just reproduce information with his name on the byline. It's not the same thing. So is the emphasis now on taking these guys from the industry and saying, right, be yourself and be. Does that make sense? Yeah,
well, I think we're certainly giving. I mean, we've got Alex Kajalski is going to be the editor, right? And he was a sports editor at the Times, and I did a lot of due diligence on him, and I talked to at least 10 people who'd worked under him, and they all said it was the best sports editor they ever worked for. And what you get with him is like he's endlessly creative, but he's also going to keep these guys in check. And I think people are going to have more of a fresh energy about them than they've ever had, and we're getting people from lots of different scenarios. So you're talking about Ollie K, who won't join us for
Phil
Hay,
quite a while, for instance.
So Phil Hay comes from a job with Yorkshire Evening Post where like his workload was significant, but like he was a big piece for them. So he kind of maybe wasn't flogged as hard as some of the other writers we've hired. Some of the other writers we've hired who had to write 12, 15 pieces a day, which is an extraordinary amount of work to have to produce. And then if you're suddenly only producing, say, 4 pieces a week for us, the quality of those 4, like, it's going to be so concentrated compared to the stuff you're doing before because you're spread so thin.
I suppose one of the most interesting people that you took sounds accusatory. Sorry, one of the people that's going to work with you, George Corkin, because for my money, both arguably the best writer in the country, but also one of the most underutilized, purely because he was kind of, not through anyone's fault, but because he was kind of pigeonholed as this Northeast guy that was very specific to his clubs. But I mean, I remember at the last World Cup, he went on the Trans-Siberian Express and wrote this wonderful 3-day piece, and just thought his range of abilities is one of your sort of your objectives, to give a platform for someone like that to make him not mainstream because everyone knows who he is, but to make his abilities a bit more mainstream and to show him for just how good he is.
Well, one of the best things when we hired Alex was we could then tell him that we'd already hired George.
Brilliant. Okay.
So like his new boss knows him very well.
Yeah.
And George, I mean, I've admired George's work from afar, like you, for years and years and years.
Absolutely brilliant.
And he is superb. And I think the thing is, what you don't realize is there are a lot of guys probably who have the same or similar skill set to George, like good contacts, great writing, very thoughtful, very considerate people, but they just don't get the opportunities to show that. And like what I'd rather hope is I mean, look, George is going to do amazing work. I've got 0% doubt about that. It's more the other guys who you might not think have got that in them. And then over the next 6 months to a year, you're going to see it. You're going to see that these guys have so much more than they're capable of, but you're going to Spurs Watford on a Tuesday night and then something else on the Thursday for the Europa League, and you just don't have time. Like, it's just how it is.
Do you have anyone in mind? I don't want you to put pressure on anybody, but just, or you can talk in generalities if you like.
I'll do my Brendan. I'll put 3 names in an envelope and you can have them for at the end of the season. We'll open it up. I'll come back on the podcast and we can talk about who made it.
This time next year.
Do you have any more questions?
No, I mean, you know what? From my point of view, it's just interesting because I'm not going to pretend that I haven't indulged in some of the gossip, because that's really all that any football writer in the country has been speaking about for 6 weeks.
So we should, put this into context for people who are listening who aren't involved in these circles at all. Everyone like you has been talking about this for ages, because
like
it's a
gossipy old hag like myself. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Because you sort of, not because of any agenda, just because nothing like this has ever really happened before. And so I'm fascinated by what gets produced, but I'm also interested by what it creates.
Some background to that as well. One of the things we had to do was, because of the time scale heading towards when we're going to launch this, we needed to make those approaches in that week, whatever it was, May 25th or whatever.
That must have been crazy.
So we had to talk to a lot of people who we'd pinpointed, had drawn their names up on a whiteboard in San Francisco a few weeks before. And then after that, the guys were together for Europa League final in Baku, then the Champions League final in Madrid, and then England were away in Portugal.
Yeah.
So there was essentially all of the top journalists in the country, really, or a lot of the top journalists in the country were away together for 3 weeks almost, in the immediate aftermath of us approaching a ton of them. So like, it obviously became a self-perpetuating gossipy thing. Like, we just had to ignore it and do what we were going to do. But like, just unfortunately this year, the way it worked out meant that it was inescapable that the level of gossip would go through the roof.
So I remember, like, behind the curtain, I remember being, I went to a premiere of a documentary, I think probably just before or just after the Europa League final. And I was on the bus back from it to a station with one of the guys that's has moved on to join you guys. And he was gossiping on his phone to another very well-known sports writer with a very distinctive voice, and it was surreal. It was almost inescapable. It really was. It was very interesting. But I think it's necessary. Like I think kind of what Ed said about giving people the opportunity to do things, because people do get beaten down by the schedule of it's a long season. You're not allowed to complain about it because it's football writing and it's reporting and you must like all that stuff. But I'm fascinated by what some of these people will do when they're freed up a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've been trying to kind of throw really ambitious ideas at them so they can see the scope and the scale to what we're going to do. Editorially, we have to be ambitious. We have to try and do things that people haven't done. And it's going to be fun, because when we pull these ideas off, it's going to be so satisfying. And I think all of the guys and girls, obviously, that we've hired so far, I think they appreciate that this is a good opportunity for them, because the uplift in the quality of their work, that's what your next employer looks at. Even 10 years down the line, you're going to have an incredible body of work to show for it. And actually, the reality is that in some places where you're working, you can't do your best work. And that's what people judge you on in this industry. I had to approach a lot of these people basically only knowing their work that I read every single day. And I have read every single day for the last 5 years. But imagine if you weren't able to put your best stuff out there. It was like, I'll let you print your CV off, but you can only print off half of it. Mm-hmm. It's not fair. So I just think everyone that we've brought on board is kind of energized by the possibility to do way more ambitious stuff. Someone was talking about maybe going to see Iniesta in Japan. I was like, well, if you can get the interview, go ahead and do it. And that's a sort of level of ambition, because you can imagine what that piece looks like, where you take Iniesta out somewhere in Kobe as he's in, and maybe you go and do a piece about the earthquake, a huge earthquake in Kobe with Iniesta. There is scope to do so much more, and for a variety of reasons, maybe it's the cycle of games week in, week out, and finances and all the other stuff, people aren't doing it.
That's what a contrast as well, because obviously to use that Iniesta example, the first question if you pitch that would be, right, how much is it actually going to cost though? versus how well is it going to do. So that must be, for those guys, you're right, energizing is probably the right word.
But again, if you do that piece and you do it really well, and this is what it comes down to, the business model, right? If you do that piece and you do it really well, it'll make the company tens of thousands in subscribers. So it's well worth it. Like it's well worth the trip. And some of I was a subscriber like you before I joined. And there's a piece that they did with Mike Piazza, who is a baseball Hall of Famer.
Owns a little team in Italy now,
Yeah,
doesn't
he took over 99-year-old team in Reggiana. They're called Reggiana.
It's a great story.
He took over Reggiana. They're 99 years old, and they're bankrupt by their 100th birthday. And like that story cost a load. It was like people flying to Italy to make it happen and stuff. Yeah. But that's generated like how many subscriptions? Can you remember? Hundreds and hundreds of subscriptions, right? Because people are like, wow, the quality of this is...
And that's paid for exactly immediately then, basically, in terms of the
for sure,
itself.
For sure, and that's how we have to look at it now, right? Is it's like, if people are willing to pay for the really good content, then we're going to be providing it. And that's full on, like, and I see this with the club stuff, and like, I think we're going to really win on a lot of these clubs because, like Palace, for example, like when I was 14, all I wanted was stuff about Palace, to the extent you're on like the club forums reading guys who went to a game in 1979 tell you about how great it was. And it's like, I don't even care. But this guy who's just wildly exaggerating about a game he can't even remember. Like, I just needed it. And now we're going to have like, for every club that we cover, there's going to be that historic stuff. There's going to be the stuff very much in the present. Look into the future, look at the academy kids, like send our reporter down to the under 18s, send them down to the under 23s, see who catches your eye and all that sort of stuff, because that's what fans want to know.
Mm. Can I ask you about your situation personally? I mean, obviously, your time in The Independent was very successful. You built, I think a great football department there with Johnny, Miguel and Jack. What was it that sort of made you leave that? Because that must be that presumably wasn't an easy situation to leave behind.
It was, look, The Independent was awesome. They gave me an opportunity to basically build that thing from scratch. I guess I'm doing the same here, building it from scratch. It's just a different model and a bigger budget,
I guess, yeah.
But at the Indie, it was all about, look, we're going to have to do something different because we haven't got the firepower to take on Guardian, the Mail, and other people in terms of how many reporters we're going to have. But what we can do is have an identity. We can do stuff differently. And it really works, like it wasn't just even football, like around some of the other sports. Johnny did some phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, he's magic.
As you know. And like,
absolutely. Yeah.
I think that what we saw was people will come towards the quality. People will come towards, a different identity if you can establish that. But for me, like, so my other half's American and she has wanted to go back for a few years. She's been in Europe for a long time now and has stated an interest in going back. And I've, thought about it before. And I first talked to the Athletic like 2 years ago, a year or two ago, Akil, who isn't here at the moment, but I talked to him and I was interested. And then when they rang me in April, May, whenever, and I was like, okay, well, let's have a conversation about it. We had the conversation. And then after I'd had that, I was so excited by the possibilities because, they told me to go more ambitious than I ever thought. I wrote all these names up on a whiteboard and said, I'd do this. And they're like, go and get them.
All names in terms of staff and potential.
Yeah. And they just said, go get them. And
do you ever think you're dreaming?
No, I mean, like, if I was dreaming, I'd be on a beach somewhere. It would involve far more relaxation and far less kind of jetting around London on the tube. Mm. But I mean, it's been like, I couldn't have drawn a more perfect job for myself. It's like you get to build the thing from scratch. Oh yeah, you can go back and live in America, keep the missus happy, like. And then you get to, build like a greatest team of football writers that's ever been built. Like that, for me, is dream scenario. But I think it's one of those things where like we're now in the future, aren't we? So we have launched. I'm so glad the launch went really well. But until it launches, you can't feel the happiness of like, man, because if the app breaks down on the first day, then like I'm not going to be happy about anything.
Mm. I suppose... The one question I'd ask is was the sort of the procurement period a little bit difficult? Because obviously some of the guys that are moving with you are leaving behind like really prestigious jobs, the kind of jobs that people who enter the industry dream of occupying. Oh yeah. At the apex of their career. Is it a difficult sell to? I'm not saying that what you're proposing is tenuous in any way, but you're saying to someone, right? For instance, you're the chief writer at the Mail or the Times or whatever, and come and join this thing which is still conceptual.
Mm-hmm.
Was that difficult?
I mean, as you can imagine, it came up in a lot of discussions.
For
you know,
sure,
we've had
yeah.
the chief football writer of the Guardian, the chief football correspondent of the Times, a sports editor of the Times. Like, it came up. It was. I think people realise the potential behind it. That, you know, they do see that, like, for whatever, and there are people who just wanted to change.
Yeah.
There were people who, you know, I think George, you mentioned, had been at the Times for 21 years.
Is it that long? Okay.
So he'd been there for 21 years, and that's a hell of a time. And he wouldn't leave that unless it was something that he believed in and was truly solid. I think it helps that we've done a few things. We've flattened the hierarchy. You know, like you talk about the apex of career and being a chief and stuff. And we talked to other people who couldn't get over the fact that there was no hierarchy, because all they've ever aspired to is being the number one. And kind of because of our business model, your chief football writer is essentially whoever is covering your club. You know, like, so if you're a Leeds United fan, Phil Hayes, your chief football writer. It doesn't matter about titles and stuff like that. Like, that's been quite a liberating thing, I think, for a lot of people, because the real success we had is in that middle class of football writers who have been held back by the fact that the guys in the number one spots have just sat there for 10 years or 15 years. So there's been this kind of compressing of the middle class, and we've hired a lot of people from that who are all good enough to be chief football writers at newspapers, but there aren't enough jobs going around. So that, I think that was a good sell for them. And also we've given everyone equity in the company, which is something that you would never dream of getting at any other company. And it means you're literally invested in the success of this. And I like to think you know, they believe in the company even if they didn't have the equity, but they have the equity as well now, so they have something to earn from it. Yeah.
It sounds like a new dawn.
I hope so.
Yeah. Where can people go and find? I believe we have an offer code.
You do. theathletic.co.uk/Tifo. In the first year, that's 50% off if you subscribe
For the
during
whole
August.
year?
Yeah, so
crikey.
it's going to come out at like 30 quid for a whole year. Per month, my maths tells me that's like £2.50-ish. So that's the price.
Brexit pending. We'll
Yeah.
see. I mean, you know.
yeah. No, that could
Seems
be
to
like
get worse every day. It might be 20 quid soon. I mean, I don't know.
£1 million.
£12. But yeah, so that's theathletic.co.uk/Tifo, 50% off for the first year, £2.50 a month. So
Brilliant.
enjoy.
Well, listen, we would thoroughly encourage that people go and sign up. As Seb said, here's a subscriber. They gave me one for free, which is great, so I don't have to pretend I pay for it.
Cheating,
but it is really good, isn't it?
That was on our list of things you weren't supposed to talk about.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. But Ed, thank you so much for coming in. Guys in the background who you can't really see on the camera, thanks for accompanying him. And
Thank you very much for
hopefully
having
we'll hear more from you throughout the season as well.
Absolutely.
Good luck.
Okay, so that's the end of today's episode. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. Thank you to Ed Malyon and the guys from The Athletic for coming in. I can't stress enough how excited we are about working with them for the whole season. Really looking forward to speaking to some more of the writers who are going to come in and talk to us at various podcast episodes throughout the rest of the season. So do listen out for that. Thank you to Seb for coming in and explaining, well, the impossible VAR guidelines. I shouldn't say they're impossible, they're not. But as Seb acknowledges, it's going to take us some time, I think, maybe a season or two to really understand how it's all going to work after various precedents have been set and the like. But thank you to Seb. We will be back next week with, I think, Alex. I can't remember. We've also got another bonus episode coming out next week. We haven't recorded it yet, so unless it's cancelled, that will be happening too. So keep an eye open for that. And one final thing I wanted to say before the end of today's podcast. Last week, I asked some of our listeners to donate to my mother's walking marathon, which she was doing in support of the Glenclwyd's voluntary audiology service, where they go out to people's homes and assist people who are often elderly, often isolated, with their hard of hearing requirements, and so people did, and I just wanted to say thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's very, very kind. It's very touching. My mother was pretty overwhelmed as well, and she was desperate for me to say thank you as soon as possible. She smashed her target, so that's great. I mean, you can still donate if you want to, but I think she's hit her target already, so don't feel any burning desire to now. But yeah, she was very moved, and and pretty overwhelmed with the whole thing. In fact, she couldn't even talk to me on the phone the day after the podcast went out, because so many of you were so very kind with your donations. A handful of you gave very large donations, which was, hugely appreciated. But my mother was very keen for me to acknowledge the people who were giving a little bits as well. And I'm sure that's, what people can afford to. It all helps. It really does. So thank you so much to everyone who did that. We really, really appreciate it on behalf of me and on behalf of my mother, which is lovely. So we will be back next week, and thank you so much for listening. See you then.